Welcome. This is FP 580, Business Practices. We're in Module 2, where we're going to talk about business fundamentals and competition. We start this whole enterprise by talking about the fundamentals of what happens in business markets, what are the dynamics of a corporation that make it work. And we start talking, in this presentation, we start with competition. The real question we have for ourselves in competition is, why is it that some businesses in a particular industry prosper more than others? I can imagine that we could pick almost any industry. We could look around us and say, why are some of these folks doing better than others? Topic that's in the news predominantly today is the automobile industry. And we could easily look at that and say, why are some corporations in the automotive industry far more prosperous than others? The answer is, usually one or two businesses in an industry outperform the others because they possess a superior competitive strategy. So we're putting two words together here. We're talking about competition and we're talking about strategy. Recall that we're not going to become, in this course, experts on strategy, but we are going to become very fluent in the use of that word. And as we encounter it going forward, and we will in this course, you'll hear both about strategy and competition, you'll be comfortable with what we're talking about. So let's begin to think about, what does competitive strategy mean? Competitive strategy is governed by two things. First of all is the industry that we're participating in. How attractive is that industry for profit? Some industries are more attractive than others, and we'll get a sense of why that's true as we go forward. But intuitively, I think you understand how that works. Finally, competitive position or competitive advantage, which is the jargon we use within the industry. In other words, where within an industry is a corporation position with respect to their competitive advantage. We have to consider both of these elements, but we're going to begin here with competitive advantage. Everything we know and discuss in competitive advantage goes back to a milestone publication by Michael Porter. He's on the faculty at the Harvard Business School. He published this book in 1985, and it is still the criteria that we use on this subject. And when you sit down and enroll yourself in an MBA course, one of the first things you'll probably read is competitive advantage. So the terminology is in competitive advantage is attributable to Michael Porter. And you will hear me refer to Michael Porter as we proceed in here. He is the last word on competitive advantage and competitive strategy. To understand competitive advantage, we study what we call a value chain. And the metaphor of a chain is useful because as we think about competition and our competitive advantage, vis-a-vis somebody else in our industry, we are only as strong as our weakest link. And I think you'll get a sense of that as I move forward. This is the original value chain depiction that was done by Michael Porter. And you get a sense here where what he's showing is the fundamental buckets that things operate, whoops, we want to go back here, operate in a corporation. In other words, he says there's inbound logistics. We're talking here about ordering, purchasing, everything related to the whole incoming materials function. The next step in our chain, if you want, is operations. That's going to be everything that happens in the corporation to add value to a product. It can be design engineering. It can be any kind of a manufacturing. It could be research. But that's pretty much what happens in operations. Generally, In the analogy of a simple corporation, we think of that as the factory floor. Outgoing logistics, again, we're doing warehousing, transportation, and so forth. We have a function that what come next, at least in the concept here, is marketing and sales and service. And ultimately, we have the point that the corporation, if it's doing its job, is making margin. Now, superimposed on this operating flow of the chain through the corporation is the firm, what we would consider support activities, the firm infrastructure. There's a building, there's groundskeepers, there's folks that plow the driveways. We then have a whole human resource management capability. We have what we would call R&D, technical development, procurement. There could be any number of items in here, but they're not hands-on on the value chain, but they do provide the support. Now, we're going to talk a little more about value chain shortly, because once Porter introduced this concept, folks began to work with it. Many consulting firms began to work with it, and we saw all kinds of different ideas. This is a very simple approach, and I've used this in classes before. I think it's a little easier to see how the value chain works. In other words, we progress, as you can see, from we have our inbound logistics, we proceed to operations, outbound, marketing and sales, service, and on to the customer. And we have our infrastructure, which is sort of supporting this whole operation. The key to understanding competition is to analyze this value chain. So the value chain identifies the activities that go on in a business to add value. In other words, if I went out and bought a casting and dusted it off and took it out and put it on the shelf and tried to sell it, I'm not likely to sell that casting for much more than I paid for it. If, on the other hand, I machine it, I add some design capabilities from my engineering, I calibrate it, and out comes a nice machined finished product, well, I have added value, and somebody is willing to pay me for that added value. And that's the notion of how we get in, how we use our value chain is what activities are we engaged in to add value. So there's the input resources to produce and deliver a product or service to the market. The profit defense of the corporation, and we'll talk more in subsequent sessions about how we measure profits, but right now the profit of the corporation depends on the effectiveness in managing key activities efficiently. The value chain analysis defines core competencies and the activities which an organization can pursue for a competitive advantage. Core competencies, as the word implies, are things that we do extremely well. If I'm a consultant in software installation, then that's my core competency. I wouldn't represent that I would consult, let's say, in human resource programs, because that's not my core competency. In fact, I probably don't even deal with human resources in my company. I may farm that out to somebody else. So core competencies is what I do well. And with my core competencies, I can pursue a competitive advantage. I can get a competitive advantage one of two ways. One is a cost advantage. That means my price for a given utilization of a product is lower than my competitors, and therefore people will purchase from me. Or I've got what we call a differentiation advantage, and that means that people are willing to purchase my product because there's something about it that differentiates it in their buying decision compared with other products they might choose. So our value chain, as we work with our value chain and we think about competitive advantage, we're really talking in the corporation about the balance between either a cost advantage or a differentiation advantage. It's possible we could achieve both. Generally speaking, we think of the cost advantage where the consumer, the purchasing decision maker, is making that choice pretty much on price, because if our cost is lower, our price can be lower. Or they're prepared to pay a premium because the features of our product or our service appeal to them. So here's what we say about a cost advantage. If our competitive advantage is going to be based on cost, an organization may achieve a cost advantage either by reducing the cost of individual activities in that value chain. I might reduce the cost of my manufacturing, or I might reduce the cost of some part of my manufacturing. I might design it so that it is less expensive to create. I'll do something within the individual value chain activities that reduces cost. Or I'll reconfigure the value chain. Typically, again, in the manufacturing model, I'll put in a new production process. It may involve the redesigning the product so I can manufacture it less expensively. And these 2 points about the cost of individual activities or reconfiguring the chain may actually, what I'm doing is you may not even be able to differentiate. But the notion is that these are the 2 ways that I get a cost advantage. A differentiation advantage can arise from any part of the value chain, can create for me this differentiation advantage. Either unique inputs, fashion items, a design, a material. I think we're all familiar with that. I could raise the surface level of my distribution channels. There are certain products that we would have a differentiation advantage because people like the service that comes with them, or perhaps the lack of service, but when they need it, it's there. I, not too long ago, purchased a new vehicle, and I live up in Vermont, and I'm out in the woods, and we don't have a lot of car dealers, but I went to the one with whom I had excellent service results, and I made it clear to them that it was their service that was bringing me back as an interested buyer. So I differentiated on the basis of their service. And certainly, product design, the features, the ease of use, the appearance. I don't have to cite examples of this for you. I would think that probably product design is the most common instance of differentiation that we encounter. So linkages. Value chain activities aren't isolated. You recall in our diagram that they move one to the other, so they're linked. And it's not unreasonable to take for granted, I think, that one value chain activity affects the other. So a design change, for example, might simultaneously reduce the manufacturing cost, improve the reliability, so the warranty cost is reduced, and we actually have what amounts to a cost reduction and a service improvement. Outsourcing is another part of value chain management. Organizations may specialize, and frequently do, in selected value chain activities and outsource the rest. In other words, the question is, to what degree are they vertically integrated? There are some businesses where the raw material will come in and out comes the finished product. Nowadays, we tend to have subcontract capabilities where we might be making an electronic product, and we might design it, and we might have the whole circuit board made for us by somebody else who specializes in circuit boards, and then we add the components and complete our product. So value chain analysis can help understand the strengths and weaknesses in each activity. As we look at the activities in the value chain, we can decide are those our specialties, or as we talked about earlier, are those our core competencies. Can the activity that we're looking at be performed cheaper or better by a supplier? Is the activity a key competency that results in a cost or differentiation advantage? Clearly, we tend to want to keep our key competencies in-house. Not only do we not want to teach someone else how to perform that key competency, we want to maintain the quality and continue to upgrade it. And again, that follows to the next point. We don't want to lose capability. If I outsource an activity completely and I no longer have any capacity for that capability, I could leave myself vulnerable if my outsource can't perform. Years ago, I did some work with Motorola, and we were sourcing some small ceramic parts called resonant generators, and they're made of ceramic. And we found several excellent sources for these resonators, but Motorola always kept a small capability out in their Chicago office, Chicago plant, where they could make these resonators just in case the offshore sources couldn't provide what they needed. The other thing to consider here, will outsourcing lead to other process improvements or investment reduction? Oftentimes, we have a process that's involved in the making of our product. There is an outsourced firm that specializes in it, or is certainly competent, and we can free up investment by not keeping that capability ourselves, so that that investment capability can be used somewhere else where it's more important. And unique. Every organization will have a value chain unlike that of any other organization. No two organizations will have identical value chains. That's just not in the nature of it. It just doesn't happen. There's always some unique characteristic, no matter how generic the product is that's being made. That being the case, then value chain analysis always has the opportunity to yield some benefit regardless of how simple or common the product is. I'm going to show you several value chain presentations here now. And the point of this is to just demonstrate to you how different businesses, different industries think about value chain concepts differently. Here's a very simple value chain, and you can see that we've talked about demand. They're thinking now in terms of their primary value chain. They identify demand generation, and then they talk about demand fulfillment. Now, this is the same value chain that Michael Porter gave us, but they're now beginning to flesh it out. They talk about what do they think belong to inbound logistics. What belongs in operations, what belongs in outbound and marketing and service. And they're very specific about what are those support activities. And whether you're a support activity or whether you're in the link part of the chain, it may make sense to spend more time looking at that activity, either in our main chain, we're likely to find opportunities either to reduce cost or improve efficiency, and certainly in the support activities to reduce cost. Here's another example of a value chain. Now, this is actually folks that are in the food processing business. And what they're doing is they're talking about their input suppliers, veterinary services, the farmers that do the work, and so forth. So you get a sense here of how they look at their value chain, and their nomenclature here is different than what they're talking about. Farmers, meat packers, the people that actually do the fabrication. In other words, they cut the portions, and the people that distribute it, and then they look at their various markets. So this is again another industry looking at this this whole concept of a value chain differently. This is again another approach to this. This is a biometrics business. They start with their core technology, they move on to their product, and they're sticking technical integration application. So they think of their value chain, as they say, from core technology to total identification solution. They're looking at it substantially different than the earlier ones we looked at, and that's appropriate because they've spent the time to learn about their business. Here's an interesting one. I'm not sure I completely will ever figure this out, but this is some folks that are in the information technology business, and they're talking about their information technology approach. They're going to collect, store, validate, analyze, and share. Those are what the value chain in their particular business is and how they look at it. And so you can see now how they talk about a definition in each case, and they talk about an example. If you're wanting to speak about this business, I think you can understand where this gets to be a pretty practical approach to this. Okay. This is a very interesting concept of a value chain. We're going to come back to this a little later, but right now, this is a company that makes a portable MP3 player. So they actually start up here. They talk to us about their suppliers. They come down here and they talk to us about a manufacturer. They then talk about their retail outlets over here. Very interesting that they've got those. And now there's all of the end users. Understand that the end users are the termination of the value chain, but what we're going to find out is that their control of the value chain stops when they deliver it to the retail outlet. So this is an entirely different way of thinking about how a value chain works for a business. Finally, I'm going to show you one here for a professional service company. Many of you will identify with the professional service business. And this is a well-respected company working with a very well-respected consultant to think about how they deliver professional services. And you can see the format, the way the orientation and everything else is substantially different than anything else we've seen, but yet they're fundamentally looking at a cycle over here that does measurement, application, and results, and then ends up taking investment in, looking for more resources, but ultimately delivering a service to their client. This is fascinating. If you didn't know better, you'd think we had a bunch of tropical fish swimming upstream. But this is a semiconductor fab value chain. And it's, again, conceptually it works for them. And they show how they start with what they consider over here to be these input services. They've got some foundry stuck in here, I think, and I think what you find is that the gray ones mean that these are really outsourced. These are really outsourced activities. And then there's some semiconductor fab. There's some other activities that go on, but you can see how they think about their value chain, and the color code is useful for them in terms of classifying where it stands. It also, by the way, has some indication to them as to where they add the most value and where they may be able to spend the most time on their value chain, either for cost or differentiation. Now, not only do we have a corporation's value chain, But we have a vendor with a value chain over here, and a good vendor will look at their client and say, where can I impact my client's value chain? In other words, if I understand how a value chain analysis works, then I can look at my client, my customer, and I can say, here's what I do for a service, or here's what I have for a product, and where am I going to target my customer to help him achieve a competitive advantage by using my product or my service. And when those of us that are practicing professional services, that's what a good bit of our selling activity, the rainmakers that sell our services, that's what they should be doing. And when we get further out in the course and we start talking about marketing and selling, we're going to come back to this notion. But understand how over here in my corporation, if I look at my value chain, I'm moving around here and I apologize, my value chain, I can come over here and see how does this impact on my clients. So if my expertise is in outbound logistics, and I'll work with my value chain and I'll find out how I can sell my services to them, knowing that outbound logistics is important to them, because perhaps I know that they're work on a cost differentiation, on a cost advantage, and therefore they're going to be interested in what I can do to help them with their outbound logistics. So these are the kinds of things. Not only do we use a value chain internal to our corporation, but we do it as we look at our clients. Let's talk a little now about the other piece of what happens out there in business. We talked about competitive advantage. We're going to spend a few minutes here on industry attractiveness. So we define industry attractiveness as depicted in concepts and terms set forth by Michael Porter. Michael Porter, before he wrote Competitive Advantage, wrote, again, the seminal book on competitive strategy. And our terms that we use as we discuss strategy and the concepts we have are the same as the work he did way back almost 30 years ago. But he nailed it pretty well, and nobody's done a better job with it. So anyhow, Porter identified 5 forces. He said the first one is, and this is how does an industry, how do we define what goes on in an industry? And he said there's 5 forces in my industry. First one is, how easy is it to get in? You know, some industries it's very easy. If I want to be in the software business, I don't need too much except a computer and perhaps a little software, but I don't need very much to go in and start creating software. If, on the other hand, I want to manufacture automobiles, I've got a fairly substantial investment just to be in the business. And so in that case, the ease of entry into the automotive business is not easy. It's very difficult. Not only, by the way, do I have to have all the facilities, I have to have the dealer network and everything, so it's difficult. If I want to be in many service businesses, if I want to represent that I'm a consultant, in fact, when I started my own consulting business, it was very easy to be in the business. I paid $25 for a limited license corporation, got a name that nobody else was using in Vermont, which isn't very hard, and all of a sudden, I was in business. Now, we'll talk about sales and marketing and professional services when we get on into the course, but to enter the industry was very easy in that particular case. So I think you have a sense of the kinds of dimensions we're dealing with there. Threat of substitution of other products. If I'm a cell phone manufacturer, the threat of substitution of other products is pretty high unless I've got something unique like an iPhone. But if I'm just selling run-of-the-mill cell phones, there's any number of other products that people could substitute. Or if I look at this another way, if I'm making potato peelers and I'm concerned about my threat of substitution, well, somebody could come out with a paring knife and The paring knife will be a substitution. In other words, it'll do the same job, but it's a different product. That's another form of substitution. Bargaining power of purchasers. In other words, we've talked about competitive advantage, and we implied in there that we've got purchasers who are making buying decisions. And so one of the dimensions of the attractiveness in an industry is how much real power do those purchasers have. And we'll talk a little bit how we define that. But in some industries, the purchasers have a lot of power. And if you're selling automatic weapons, your purchaser is going to be the U.S. Army. Or if you're selling helicopters, by and large, it's the U.S. government. So you have purchasers with very strong bargaining power. On the other hand, if I'm selling laptop computers, the purchasers don't have much at all. There's lots of products. The industry's churning around all the time. Okay, bargaining powers of suppliers. There are industries where a few suppliers have a tremendous amount of power. They can set the price. There are many others where the suppliers are basically selling commodities and they sell on price only and they don't have a lot of bargaining power. And then finally, there's a thing that we would call industry infighting, but that's the rivalry among industry competitors. A good example of that is the airline industry. If American Airlines drops the price by $5 of their fare from New York to Los Angeles, you can bet your life that United Airlines is going to do the same thing. And if American Airlines decides to raise their price from New York to Dallas, I would be willing to bet that most of the other airline carriers making that run would do the same. So there's intense rivalry in there. That's completely within that industry. It doesn't care about these other particular dimensions. So the simple diagram that we use here is we talk about the industry competitors, and we have the buyers on one side, we have the suppliers and the substitutes and so on. So this is the conceptual diagram that Michael Porter gave us, and this is the one we use. Now, this particular chart shows you in considerably more detail the kinds of things that I've just been describing to you that influence the power or the forces that are effect in the industry. Again, we have supplier power. By the way, supplier concentration. If there's only a few suppliers, they have a fair amount of power. You'll notice that this chart is rotated a little bit. On the other one, we had supplier power to the left and barriers to entry on the top, but I'm sure you'll figure all that out. So, by the way, proprietary intellectual property is a great barrier to entry if you have it and you can maintain it. It tends to be the greatest barrier of entry that many professional service firms, in particular consulting kinds of firms, have. Buyer power is always fascinating to me. Their leverage, the volume they buy. Imagine the kind of discounts that Hertz gets when it buys thousands and thousands and thousands of automobiles compared to what you and I might get when we buy a car. So, and a degree of rivalry. This is really interesting. There's one author that calls this industry churn, C-H-U-R-N. The degree of the concentration, whether there's overcapacity in that industry from time to time, how strong is the brand identity, and for some folks, for some companies, it may be a particular industry they see it as a high stakes capability for them or involvement for them, and they're prepared to do anything to keep their position. Okay, so we've talked now about competitive advantage and how we deal with our value chain to understand that, and how we can strengthen the value chain and to improve our competitive advantage, and we've talked about our industry analysis. The next point we want to talk about here is market segmentation. And again, we're really talking about an aspect of the overall business arena that we're participating in. So once a clear picture of the value chain's been developed, and once I have an understanding of my industry and its characteristics, which hopefully will tell me whether it's attractive to me or not, it often is useful to break down the overall market into discrete segments. What we mean by a segment is that it's, well, it fits a myriad of descriptions. It could be age, gender, income, geographic. In other words, I might decide that my market segment is for all males 50 and over, because those are the people that I want to sell to. Or, I mean, because gender and age are two very popular ones. It could be income level, it could be geographic location. It could be, I may say that my market segment is I'm just selling into the analog semiconductor business. If I sell a particular kind of machinery, if I'm making a sophisticated lab equipment, I may sell only to universities and pharmaceutical companies. But there's very, very few businesses or professional services at some point don't have a market they look at. I would expect that many of you are in businesses that has a segment around some sort of need for fire protection consulting. So automatically, you and your companies are looking at those sorts of segments. We further define segment and talk about a market niche, or niche. A market niche is just a segment we do in more detail. So we could be talking about, again, we could be even more specific. We could be talking about all men over 50 who are more than 20 pounds overweight. I don't know. That could be our niche. So we describe it in greater detail. We focus on it. And when, as an example, if you're starting a new business, you come in with a new idea, I've got a new product that, or a new service, and you go to a venture capitalist, the first thing they're going to look at, or one of the first things they're going to look at, is what market niche? How good is it? How well defined? How attractive is what you're proposing to do with respect to that niche that you've identified? You come in with a good concept or product for a market niche that, let's say, is identifiable, can be defined, and it looks like it's underserved or not served for the product or service you're proposing, you're going to find investors interested. One of the main reasons is they can understand what they're talking about. It's not global, it's very specific. So we talk about using segments and then niches within that segment. Let me just come back to this picture, and let's talk a little bit about who are the end users. And it's kind of interesting because the end users in this particular case, as you can see down here, these are the folks that the retail outlet sells to, but it's not, in the case of this company that's making the MP3 player, their customers are the retail outlets, not the end users. So if they're going to target a segment and a niche, they're going to have to make sure that that's going to be consistent with the way that these retail outlets can focus on them. They've got to make sure that they're going to work, that there's a retail outlet that'll service the market they want. Now, let me give you another example here of market segmentation. We're talking now about our end users, and in the top of our chart, we talk here about what we've got as our total market. And it's made up of males and females, and you can see we got age, so we end up taking our market and we break it down to a 2x4 segmentation, and that's just to begin with. And by the way, when we want to, there's a key here that each little figure represents so many million folks in the market, let's say. So we can look and see where are the big segments. Well, if we're going to do males, the largest segment is age 20 to 24. If we're going to do women, we either want to be in that same segment, or even better, we want to be 30 to 34. So for women, I've got to be one age group, and for men, the other. And the next thing I want to know is how many competitors and so on go on within those niches. But you can get us within those segments, and what niches are there in between or within those, so you can get a sense of how we might begin to approach a market. Now, we're going to talk more about markets a little bit later, but since we're talking about industries, and we think about an industry that we want to participate in, it doesn't take very much in the way of pursuing that thought to see how quickly we get down into market segmentation and market niches. Finally, I've got a chart here that is, only because we've spent so much time talking about Michael Porter, that he didn't originate, but he did lay the groundwork. I believe this was originally done by the McKinsey Consulting Group. But when we talk about market attractiveness, McKinsey developed this in the work that they were doing with General Electric Company back, in the late 70s, early 80s. And they said, let's define 4 markets. We want to do it in terms of our relative market share, because the more share we have in the market, the more predominant we can be, and how fast that market is growing, because we want to be strong in a market that's growing fast. Well, so they simply, they put names on them. When you hear people talk about a cash cow is a company where we would be a business where we have a high market share. And usually, by the way, this is a mature product line. One of the items here that a cash cow at GE, for example, for years was small motors. Very high market share, very low growth, and it didn't require a lot of investment, and that business ran and ran and ran and ran and ran, and it generated cash. And the cash was used, and we'll talk about cash later on, but it generated the money, the cash, that could be used in other businesses. Well, now we got a star. In the case of GE, a star was medical equipment. The growth was fast, and GE had a high share. They introduced, as you know, the CAT scan, the magnetic resonance imaging scanning machines were introduced by GE. So in the medical machinery, the imaging market, they had a very large share, and that was growing very fast. That was deemed to be a star, a business that we wanted to follow. And by the way, the cash to help to develop that business came from the cash cow into the star. There were some businesses where they had very low market share, and the market wasn't growing very fast, and so they decided that they would sell those businesses. A good example of that was small house appliances, toaster ovens, hot plates, things of that nature. For years, GE ran that business in Bridgeport, and they finally concluded when they did this analysis that that was a business that, for them, it didn't merit putting any more money in. It wasn't going to go anyplace. What they wanted to do was be up here with the stars. Now, there were some business where the market share was low, but the business was growing very fast, and they had to decide what they were going to do. The point of all of this analysis was to find out what are these businesses and to see if I could move that business over here. And if I got rid of the dogs so that they didn't take any cash, I kept these businesses that were cash cows. I could put the cash into here to move them over here. Simple demonstration of what happens when I understand my industry and I understand the segments and I look a little bit at how I'm going to analyze my business. You've probably heard people say, well, if I can't be first or second in my industry, I don't want to be in here. Jack Welch at GE was famous for making this statement. But this is exactly what he was talking about. Ultimately, I want my business all to be stars. That concludes our discussion of competitive advantage, market attractiveness, and market classification.
Would you like me to stop?
Yeah, I'm sorry. How do I stop this?
Okay, I'll stop.